When we talk about superpower, now generally speaking, it's very easy to think about this economic relationship. And of course, today, in the year of 2024, everyone pays attention regarding this trade relationship. And given the fact that today, that internationally speaking, the economic agenda top the priority, and especially for more countries in Southeast Asia and also more countries in the Central Europe as well. But meanwhile, if you follow the news closely, that Vladimir Putin and the sitting president of Russia recently paid a short visit to one of the critical countries in Southeast Asia, which is Vietnam. To some members in Southeast Asia, that could be alarming. Mainly, we can ask the question, what was the purpose for Putin to pick Vietnam specifically? And also, how should we understand this trade and also this political relationship between Vietnam and Russia? And given the fact that today the US was rather alarmed by Putin's visit to Vietnam and was very concerned, especially regarding the war in Ukraine. And does that mean that Vietnam today is standing at the crossroads when it comes to political allies or this strategic partnership? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, and who's the Dr. Hong Nguyen. Dr. Hai is currently a senior lecturer of politics and social change and international relations in the College of Arts and Science at VinUniversity in Vietnam. He's a political scientist, an experienced lecturer and researcher in politics and international relations. Dr. Hai, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you for having me.
Well, again, Dr. Hai, as I mentioned in the intro, when it comes to Vladimir Putin, this is not a name that's strange to the international community. But recently, that Vietnam rolled out the red carpet to welcome Vladimir Putin's visit, and right after his direct trip from North Korea. But meanwhile, that according to the news, that this visit seemed rather mutual beneficial for both countries. Dr. Hai, I want to get you started with a very fundamental question. Why Vietnam, and also how critical for Vietnam to understand and to build this relationship with Russia and also with Vladimir Putin? Your thoughts?
Thank you, Will. I know that this is a very fashionable question at the moment, and I know that the visit would be finished, but people, international communities didn't pay attention to, and also asking the question why Vladimir Putin paid a visit to Vietnam and why Vietnam's laid the red carpet to welcome Vladimir Putin to Hanoi. So I think, as Vladimir Putin already said in his speech, that it is a very symbolic visit by the Russian president to Hanoi. So I think this is really a symbolic indeed, because you know that the visit is very short. And if we look at the number of agreements signed during the visit, is not something that people should count for. Only 11 documents, only 11 agreements, and most of them are memorandum of understanding. And also, if we expect something that substantially come out from those agreements, I don't think we can see that in very short terms. So why? I think this is the my point of views is that, and I completely agree with Putin said it is very symbolic. It's symbolic in the sense that, of course, Russia is still having the war with Ukraine. Russia is also standing for months of sanction and also criticism from the West. And of course, if Vietnam see as a risk when it welcome Putin to Hanoi, then it's not worth for Hanoi to invite Putin to Hanoi at the moment. But I think, given Vietnam foreign policies and also defense policy, which are the four no defense policy, which is in terms of the foreign policies, which is the multilateralization, diversification of international relations, and Vietnam wants to be reliable partners of all countries in the international community, and also be friends to all countries around the world. So I think Vietnam sent a clear message. Within 9 months, welcome Joe Biden, welcome Xi Jinping, and now Vladimir Putin to Hanoi. So Vietnam want to send a clear message to the world that Vietnam want to be really a good friends of all countries around the world. And regardless, they are having a conflict or having even a war, or even at the minimums disagreement. So Vietnam want to, of course, it doesn't mean that Vietnam is carefree about international situation. Vietnam is really caring about what's happening in the region, what's happening in the world. But what Vietnam want to say is that it is the best for everyone to have a dialogue, to sit down, to have a dialogue, rather than to use a force in order to address agreement. So, and having said that, I also want to say that over the past days, international media have misinterpreted the West message to Hanoi. Even the statements by the American embassy spokespersons prior to Putin's visits to Hanoi. So I think the international communities, the West, now understands Vietnam foreign policy, Vietnam's neutral stance and positions in the war between Russia and Ukraine now. And I think Vietnam's really want to send a clear message to the international community that it is time now for everyone to sit down and negotiate for peace and to address disagreement.
Well, Dr. Hai, there's no denying that, of course, the entire international community today, especially that we mention US and also we talk about China, that have been actively promoting the peace dialogue. But one thing that, Dr. Hai, you know this better than I do, that Ukraine, or especially the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, has strongly rejected this peace dialogue. I mean, again, we're looking at a party that refused to sit down with Vladimir Putin, and also Putin, it's not going anywhere at this moment. But also, I want to read another statement to you, want to get your reaction. According to the media report, that experts believe, and I quote, Hanoi knows it must actively balance different powers because that's the way for Vietnam to gain benefits from all the powers, end quote. Now, you mentioned China, you mentioned US, and also Russia, and of course, we're looking at the war in Ukraine as well. But Dr. Hai, the question back to you is, how do you think that Hanoi is able to balance the power at this moment? I mean, we're looking at the complication and also the intricacy of the relationship. US and China are competing with each other. Ukraine and Russia at war. Ukraine and US are in this hot and cold relationship. Of course, Russia and US are not on a good term at this moment. So how do you think Hanoi can able to handle this balance of power, and despite that Putin has been very actively and, like you said, vocal about this relationship between Russia and Vietnam at this moment? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Hanoi has been balancing quite well the relationship between major powers.
Mm.
As you know, Hanoi just welcomed Vladimir Putin to Hanoi, but on the heels of Putin's to Hanoi, Vietnam welcomes Assistant Secretary of State
Mm.
to Hanoi, Daniel Kristen Brink. Of course, he's the former American ambassador to Hanoi. And now Vietnamese Prime Minister in Beijing, or no, not really in Beijing, but is attending the World Economic Forums
Mm.
in China. And of course, he also had meetings with Xi Jinping and also senior officers in Beijing. So do you see Vietnam, really want to or carefully balance the relationship between major powers? Vietnam tried not to send a message to the world that make different parties have different understandings of Hanoi's policy and approach. So what Vietnam really want to send a message to the world, to the international community, is that, well, Vietnam, as I said, Vietnam want to have good relationship with all major powers.
Mm.
And Vietnam is not taking side with anyone, either with the West or with Russia. Now, talking about the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and I mentioned before, I think, Will, in our previous interviews and also in other occasions, I already said the West should understand, should read carefully Vietnam's statements about Vietnam's views of Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Mm.
Now, Vietnam, in all the messages, emphasize the importance of international law, the importance of respect of sovereignty of countries, and also Vietnam emphasized that all disputes should be settled or addressed by peaceful means. And Vietnam, of course, protested the use of force and the threat to use of force. So that clearly, sending a message to Russia, to the international world, that Vietnam, implicitly does not support the Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Mm.
But of course, in diplomatic terms and diplomatic way, right? And given the stories of the relationship between Russia and Vietnam, or the Soviet Union and Vietnam's, particularly Russian and the Soviet Union assistance to Vietnam during the war. The war, I mean, from 1950s to 1970 and even 1980s. So Vietnam owed debts to Russian people from the Soviet Union, and also, of course, owed debt to assistance from those countries. So Vietnam, cannot, turn back or turn away to the people who already, assisted Vietnam during the war, during the most difficult times, the hardest period of time in the histories of Vietnam. So I think this is also the way of diplomacy, and I think the West should understand Vietnam's position, and also the West should understand that they have a reliable partners, reliable friends. Now imagine one day, say for instance, Vietnam is having a very good relationship with the United States now, right? But one day, for instance, in the future, if the United States have a conflict, an armed conflict with Russia, of course, that we don't want to see, or even with China. Now, would you expect that Vietnam would turn away and support China to fight back against the United States, or Vietnam will take side with Russia to fight back with the United States. No, Vietnam won't do that because we see the United States as an important partner, as a particularly now when the two countries is now having a strategic partnership, comprehensive strategic partnership, right? At the highest level in diplomatic relations. So Vietnam sees the United States as a good friend, as a good partner. So, and of course, the United States, seen the two countries normalize diplomatic relations in the past 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago. Next year, of course, two countries celebrating the 30 years of diplomatic relations normalization. So in the past 30 years, the two countries have very good relationship, have been very good partners, very good friends. So, and of course, the United States has supported Vietnam in many ways in order to become a, lower middle income countries at the moment. So I think Vietnam's also, know who are the best friends, who should we, owe our debt to. So I think the West should understand that, and of course, given the fact that Vietnam is a small country, right? And of course, as a small country, Vietnam know how to address, how to play with major power, with the giants, so that it can best protect its national interest.
Dr. Hai, when it comes to the word diplomacy, now, again, according to the state media that use the term what's called bamboo diplomacy. I mean, previously, you and I, we had discussion about China, that China used to, or perhaps it is still happening today, that roll out what we call this wolf warrior diplomacy. And neighboring country, India, attempt to roll out this paper tiger diplomacy. But when it comes to Vietnam, again, the term is bamboo diplomacy, that the simple interpretation is strong roots, stout trunk, and flexible branches. Dr. Hai, you are in Vietnam and you are the expert. And of course, I am not a expert on, I have to say, plantations or bamboo, but put this in this political term. What is the bamboo diplomacy from Vietnam? Again, it's not just about this diplomacy to US, to China, and to Russia. In a general sense, how should we interpret and how should we comprehend this definition of bamboo diplomacy? Your thoughts?
Well, I think, Will, that's a very interesting question. And I know that people have been very interested in, learning and trying to get a better understanding of what, does it really mean, bamboo diplomacy. Now, of course, for many people, they just simply explain or define or make it simple that bamboo diplomacy is more like a pragmatic approach or pragmatism, or even some people say it is opportunism. Now, it's not simple as such. Of course, you have defined somehow the characteristics of bamboo. Now, from my point of view, and of course, when people study more carefully the foreign policies of Vietnam and also defense policies of Vietnam, what I would say is that bamboo diplomacy here means, of course, Vietnam, first of all, is about how to defend or protect our national interest. That's the first thing. The second one is bamboo diplomacy means it really shows Vietnam's an art of diplomacy. It's an art of diplomacy. It's not the bamboo is very soft. And of course, it tried to be, adapt to the situation, right? And also that means Vietnam's is, resilient and also adaptable to the situation. We know how we can adapt to the emerging situation. We know how to adapt to the the ouster in situation in order to be stable, to be resilient, to be firm, and also to be sometimes assertive as well, in order to finally and overall protect the national interest. So, bamboo diplomacy, you can't explain, in a very simple terms. It must be understood based on the natures of the foreign policies of Vietnam, and also the overall interest of Vietnam.
Dr. Hai, I want to wrap up our conversation by going back to one of the topics that, again, you and we had before. Now, of course, you mentioned that Vladimir Putin, of course, we know that paid a short visit to Hanoi, and the Chinese leader followed in his footsteps, and of course, that aroused the major interest towards the U.S. Now, there's one territory has been very, very critical when it comes to China, Vietnam, and of course, including U.S. as well, which is the South China Sea. We know that you and we had this discussion back and forth, but again, according to the media reports, that when it comes to South China Sea, that Vietnam and Beijing, or Hanoi and Beijing, have overlapping claims. So at this moment, Dr. Hai, we're not expecting that Vladimir Putin is going to solve the problem or is going to be the mediator for this controversial, or what we say, disputable territory. But at this moment, as we're looking at the intensity of the relationship and we're looking at this projection of the diplomacy, how should we understand South China Sea at this moment? Does it still matter? If so, what should Vietnam to put out in terms of dealing with, or even, let me be careful, not the word deal with, but just to show this, I guess, positive attitude to work with Beijing without major conflict or without offending anyone? Your final thoughts, Dr. Hai.
I think the topic of the South China Sea will be something like recurrent, and it will be comes it comes on the agenda of the international security or regional security for decades to come, because it's all about national interest, right? And everyone knows that sea claimants in the South China Sea, and of course, people have witnessed the conflicts or the tension between China and the Philippines recently, and still going on. And of course, Vietnam also and China's disagree on the South China Sea territory claims. There's no doubt, and everyone knows it. And as you see in all the conversation between Chinese and Vietnamese at all level, particularly even at the top level, the topic of South China Sea is all the way on the table, is all the way in the conversation. So Vietnam is also very frank, very candid in communicating its position on the South China Sea disputes to China. And of course, Vietnam expects that in addressing the disputes in the South China Sea, peaceful means should be used rather than the use of force or the threat use of force or any coercive action in the South China Sea. And Vietnam, of course, strongly condemns and protests the use of force. And it's not in Vietnam foreign policy and also defense policy. And of course, Vietnam will try to avoid as much as possible any use of force or violent approach, if it is not the last resort in order to protect its national interest and sovereignty. So I think, of course, with Vladimir Putin's visits to Hanoi and also the issuance of the joint statements at the end of Putin's visits to Hanoi between Vladimir Putin's and Vietnamese leaders. Of course, the South China Sea is also included in the joint statement. But of course, Vietnam understands well that, of course, with Putin's visits to Hanoi and with the joint statement between the two countries, the disputes in the South China Sea between owned claimants or between China and Vietnam will be solved or will be addressed straight away. And of course, given the fact that China and Russia is having a very close relationship at the moment, it might change in the future, but at the moment, with the close relationship with China and Russia, of course, Vietnam understand well that if anything happened at the moment, Russia will not, support or assist at by own cost to Hanoi. So that's why Vietnam want to have a good relationship with all parties. And of course, Vietnam also welcomes the international communities to contribute to the settlements of the disputes in the South China Sea, including the United States, if their involvement in the settlement of disputes is positive, is constructive, and of course for peace and security in the regions. So Vietnam is open. Vietnam is willing to address the dispute in the South China Sea where appropriate, bilaterally with China, but also multilaterally where it needs to be. But of course, Vietnam is always attached to peaceful means, and Vietnam fully understands that the use of force or a violent approach is not a substantive way, is not a good way, a positive way in order to address the disputes in the South China Sea.
Well, again, Dr. Hai, I agree with you 100%. Regardless, we're looking at this wolf warrior diplomacy or this bamboo diplomacy. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned before, dialogues are critical. At this moment that we don't need distance and we do need to have this meaningful and engaging dialogues to minimize the threat to the whole world. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, and who is Dr. Hong Nguyen. Again, Dr. Hai is currently a senior lecturer of politics and social change, and also he's an expert and a political scientist in politics and international relations. Well, Dr. Hai, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back on the show to continue our dialogue. It's not just about Vietnam, but also the matters around the world. So thank you so much for doing this.